Okay, seems like we've got most people in. People and our late arrivals can just come in and join us. And we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for you all for being here and joining us from all parts of the world and sharing your time, especially at this really busy time of year as we come rapidly to the end of 2021. So great to be here together with you. As I said, there's lots of old friends and familiar faces, and I see some new names and new faces. So it's great to see our community growing. And here we are wrapping up another year together. So we were going to spend this time together today just for looking back at the work of Nonviolent Peaceforce over this past year, looking at what we've been doing, where we are working in different parts of the world and some of the things we've been involved in, and sharing some thoughts about what's coming up and what is the way forward. Hi, everybody. Looks like we're having a bit of audio problems there. Let's start that again. Going to go ahead and get started, everybody. So thanks for being here together. We're going to look back at sort of where we've been in Nonviolent Peaceforce and the work that we've done over this last year, and spend a little time looking ahead and seeing what's coming up. It's been a really exciting time and interesting time for us here at Nonviolent Peaceforce, as we've really spent a lot of time over the last 12 to 18 months really reflecting on where we are as an organization and where we want to go as we think about it from a strategic planning perspective, looking ahead from now through 2025. And so that's caused us to spend a lot of time sort of reflecting on what we're doing, how we are working to consolidate the good work that we already do and the practices that we've developed over the last almost 20 years, where we want to innovate and develop new ideas so that we can move forward into the future, and then how to accelerate, how to really be a contributor to and a force multiplier to hopefully building a more safe and just and secure world for all of us. So as we think about that, what that has meant is we spend a lot of time looking at the world that we live in and where we are, and sort of really thinking at it broadly about from what we would call a human security lens, all of the things that sort of contribute to what makes us as the human family safe and secure on the planet that we live in and in the communities that we are living in our families and our small groups. And thinking about this really does and has felt like a period of change. There's a lot of what we would call whispers in the winds or things in the air that are really contributing to a sense that this is a big moment in history. We often think and talk about when we're looking at the various countries that we work in and the patterns of conflict and the way things are evolving is what is happening now compared to the past? What would it look like if it was written in the history book 50 and 100 years ahead? And what we can see from some of the factors that are with us today is this is a very interesting moment in the world together that we're living in. Of course, as we all know, we've been all affected by the pandemic, having a global impact, and its rolling function in the way that it has impacted us, and an expanding and contracting levels of impact. And here we are again in another iteration of the pandemic, and what does that mean? And all of this has really brought to the forefront and to the top of mind how vulnerable and fragile we are, and how interconnected we are for all the good and the bad that is of that. And that really means a lot to us in Nonviolent Peaceforce when we think about the basis of our work being relationship-based, being entirely focused on figuring out how we live together harmoniously and move on to see a more just and fair world. And because of what has been happening with the pandemic, we've seen all kinds of impacts. So the way we're thinking about the economy has changed. The global supply chain has changed. We've seen products disappear from the shelves. We've seen local businesses pop up, local initiatives have more space to operate. Things are really changing, and we think about what does that mean for our overall human security. Questions around democracy. There's been a worrying trend about the rise of authoritarianism in different parts of the world. We've seen a number of rapid changes of government. We've seen a number of coups happened over the last year. And as we look forward, we all feel that there's a bit of there is a political change, and while change can open up space and opportunity for us, it is also a moment where things can be significantly impacted, and it could really affect our human security. We have things related to the climate. Our connection is strong and made stronger in many ways, and we are more fractionalized in many ways. We're being impacted by what is the world of commodified big data, artificial intelligence and technology, an incredible proliferation of weapons, and just a growing movement around civilian action. So the landscape we're working in is pretty dynamic. And in that space is where we're working as NP. This is the moment, as I said, next year NP will be 20 years old. It'll be at the 20th anniversary from when we launched our first project in Sri Lanka. And when we're thinking about what our global footprint looks like and where we have been and where we're going from, we've come a long way. As you all know, or most of you who know NP's history, NP was really started with the idea of being a movement, being part of something that was about growing and building a different way of looking at the way we manage conflict, the way we prevent conflict, the way we manage violence. And over the course of these years, we've also had to really concentrate on learning how to be an organization. As NP has grown and moved across to open up in different country locations, we've had to really focus on learning how to do that well and operate as an organization. And now we have a broader footprint with programming in areas that are experiencing pretty acute violence, areas that are experiencing some instability, and areas that have come out of long periods of violence and that are moving in towards peace. We look here and we're looking at the Philippines. The Philippines is our longest standing program. We've been in the Philippines for about 15 years now. And this is an interesting story. What I love about this photo right here is what you can see is our team located in the Philippines. We have about 60 people working there right now. And with the exception of one person, everybody on that team is local. They're from the areas that we work in. They're all from the country. That was not true when we first we first went in. And over the last year, what we have seen with the obvious understanding that everywhere we work has been impacted by the pandemic is that the Philippines has really moved into a situation what they are calling stabilization and peace implementation. So when NP went into the Philippines, it was a situation where there was a ceasefire in place. That ceasefire rapidly broke down, and then they went fully back into active conflict. And our work there was really about violence reduction and working with the ceasefire monitoring mechanism to work with local communities to implement unarmed civilian protection program in an active conflict place. So over the years that we've been there, the situation in the Philippines has stabilized really significantly. And most interestingly now, the whole structure that they have built up in Mindanao in the Philippines is really around the implementation of peace. And NP is such a central figure within that process that when you look at what the program for NP in the Philippines is right now, it accounts for about 43% of the elements in the peace agreement. So NP is embedded with the Office of the President, the peace process within that structure, and the international monitoring team that's working on the ceasefire. So our team there has had a really challenging and difficult year, but they're finding creative ways to engage in what is building peace at home. And they are, more importantly, looking towards the future. What is the future? They are really challenging the questions of what a surface level peace agreement might be. When we talk about offering simple things like the forces coming together for reducing their weapons, so on and so forth, they understand that's not addressing the root causes. That's not addressing the reality that while that peace agreement is holding, there are still issues at play in communities that they're working in, where there's inter and intra-communal violence. So the team there is spending their time thinking about how to embed an entire behavioral change structure throughout their section of the country in the coming year. Myanmar is probably one of the most dramatically impacted countries that we work in over the past year. Of all the places that we have worked, I think Myanmar has been most impacted in terms of COVID and pandemic restrictions. The restrictions around movement were the most strong in all the places that we've worked with. And our team, right from the beginning, had to do the most adaptation and to figure out how that they could provide support for the communities and the individuals that we had been working with throughout. They were able to do this ultimately by really transitioning to doing what we would call digital or online distance protection and coaching and monitoring and support. We had been working prior to the coup with about a network of about 800 civilian ceasefire monitors who were then connected throughout their entire community. So what this was really interesting to see was the ability to be a force multiplier with a very small team that had a massive presence throughout the country. So what happened was when the pandemic hit and the movement restrictions fell into place, while the adjustment period was difficult, the local communities really decided to continue to go on and continue to do their unarmed civilian protection work. In the photo, you're seeing a group of what we call emerging women leaders. So we have been working with women in all stages of society across Myanmar with a real focus of connecting grassroots women with the women working at the elite level. And what we have seen throughout this process, as the pandemic started and then in February when the coup hit, is that they were amongst the strongest and the most eager to carry on the work despite how difficult the situation has been for them. Our head of mission, Rosemary, was telling us a story about how it just moved her to tears, how they were receiving calls from community leaders within various communities saying, we haven't spoken to you, sometimes maybe in over a year, or they had heard of the work that they were doing, but this is a real security situation right now. We would like a refresher training online as quickly as possible because it's our job here to be able to keep our communities safe. The team's been working on digital support and online, or what we would call distance accompaniment, for people who have been moving across Myanmar since the coup happened, trying to arrive into safer spaces. And that really can look like somebody is moving from a city to a village, and they will call and they'll be planning ahead and saying, what is the information that we know? How can I do my personal security planning? And what's the situation like in the place that I'm going to arrive? And through the network that the team has worked with in Myanmar, they've been able to provide that information. The person arrives in the next place, they call in, and then they're able to get information about who local contacts are, where safe places they could be, and where they could then move on to, so on and so forth. It continues to be a really difficult situation, but one of the most moving things for us has been the commitment of our team, since this is all kicked off, is that we've been desperately trying to get them to take some vacation time and take a break and to take care of themselves. And they keep telling us that this is not the moment to rest. This is the moment for action. And they are continuing to work around the clock. In Iraq has been a very interesting year for our team on the ground there. Iraq, I would probably say, is the area that has been impacted sort of to the second degree as compared to Myanmar. So in Iraq, we also went through a similar situation where access restrictions, our ability to move, to reach the communities that we served, were really strictly impeded when the pandemic hit. So the team was not able to reach the various team locations for a great deal of time. That really changed significantly towards the end of last year and really at the beginning of this year. Things opened back up again and they've been able to move. So our team went from being about it had gone down to about 25 or 30 people, to we now have about 120 people in Iraq in 5 locations across the country. It's been a challenging year. It's a challenging year in the region. Politically, it's been quite challenging. Where we're operating, there are things like rocket attacks and drone strikes on a monthly basis, and as they are buffeted and impacted by the politics in the surrounding countries, as well as the disturbances within the country in and of itself, and the political tensions that have emerged from the recent election. It has created quite a destabilizing effect. Our primary work there is with populations who were displaced during when ISIS had control of some territorial parts of Iraq and have been working to return home. So this means that our team works in displacement camps and in communities where people are attempting to return home from their displacements. Some of the key problems that they're meeting is, in some cases, people are trying to go home, and when they arrive home, they find that other people are living in their houses. People have, and that's a knock-on effect by finding their own houses have been displaced. One of the biggest problems that people are having is people had really different experiences during the ISIS occupation. Some people fought really hard and openly against ISIS. Some people remained quiet and moderate and worked on surviving. Some people were caught up and in some way are perceived to have been affiliated. And we are seeing a situation where the fractures between those communities, between those people who all experienced extraordinary trauma during the course of the ISIS occupation, has put them in a position now when they're trying to return and come together and live in the same community where they all lived before this started. And they are deeply impacted by the trauma that they experienced, and it's creating tensions, which is emerging into fractionalization within the community, and in many cases, violence. So the team is working in as I said, within camps and in communities to try and support what we would call safe returns. And this can look like everything from providing protective accompaniment for people in the process when they go home. They are doing things like accompanying groups of people who are living within displacement camps to go see the area where they would return home to before they actually leave the camp that they're in and meet the local leaders, and to facilitate things like mediation between groups and create safe space between groups within different communities that they're working in. As the programming gets larger and become more deeply embedded, what we're really recognizing that as well, the high level crisis that we saw in previous years has passed. The root causes of conflict, and most importantly, and perhaps more importantly, the deep impact of that crisis is if left unaddressed, is very likely to create the conditions for the next round of what could be very serious violence that leads across that could kick off the whole country. We were talking about what would be a worst case scenario in Iraq, and we looked at sort of the reemergence of an ISIS presence that could be part of a process that kicked off a broader civil war. We had this conversation about 10 days ago, and just in the last week, we saw that a group of about 200 ISIS fighters came across the border from Syria and temporarily took territorial control of 2 small villages within Iraq, not very far from Erbil, which is the place where our country office happens. So the level of instability and the vulnerability there is still pretty high. South Sudan continues to be our largest program. It has gone through a period of relative stability this year in terms of conflict. Now, I use the word relative with quite a generous pinch of salt, as we would say, as there, of course, are still difficulties, still ongoing struggles as it relates to the violence and conflict. But as compared to a number of years ago, it is certainly far more stable than it was. The peace agreement is broadly holding. The real challenge politically in South Sudan, however, is that as things have gone on for such a long time, if we remember the civil war started in 2013, which started out as largely two groups in conflict with each other, has really broken down into a much broader range of groups that are becoming smaller and smaller and more deeply entrenched in different identities. And how this is kicking off is what that means is that there are more groups fighting for control of the resources that are there, political control, economic resources, and control of land. And we add on top of that to the fact that South Sudan is being impacted. If you've seen it, it's so much so that it's been in the media of late with issues related to climate change, which has really been flooding. And so they have, over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, the floods every year have been increasing really dramatically, to the point now where areas that have not had a previous flood cycle are now completely underwater. The impact of this is that people are having to move off the land, and which is bringing groups of people into contact with one another, into places where they now have to reestablish local governance. They have to reestablish land use in a place that is always incredibly fragile. We have about 240 staff in South Sudan in 17 field teams. So we have a massive presence across the country, and the work continues to really focus on both building local peace infrastructure as well as addressing immediate threats of violence. The women's protection teams, as many of you have heard about over the years, continue to be really strong. They recently hosted a peace conference in Juba, in the capital, bringing together representatives from women's peace and protection teams from all across the country into Juba. And they were brought together with diplomats, government leaders, representatives from the conflict parties, and their job was to represent the concerns that they had and how they were being impacted by the violence and the ongoing deprivation that has been a result of that violence in the various communities. And this is something that for us is really meaningful. I chose to put this picture in this presentation because this is a photo of the original Women's Peace and Protection team that was formed in South Sudan as part of the work that NP has been doing there back in 2011. This team was formed in a little tiny community called Nzara, which was really on the border of South Sudan and DRC. And the reason I want to draw our attention to it right now and relate it to here we are 10 years later in 2021 is now there are close to 2,000 women across the country who are part of this network. So it has grown from what you can see here on the screen to 2,000 women across the country working together to raise their voices, and most importantly, to be recognized as leaders in peace and security, as in representing the needs for their communities and the needs of their communities for the safety and security of themselves, and to be able to overcome the barrier that previously was there, which the messaging has been, is there was no room for women in peace and security. That was not the purview of women. And that has changed really dramatically. The team in South Sudan continues to work on, as I said, on local infrastructure, as well as civic engagement, really working with those local South Sudanese activists who are really engaged in solving the problems in their country in the way that they would like to do so for themselves. This is a big part and component of the work that we do, is really focusing on supporting local actors to be able to build sustainable peace by contributing to stabilizing and protecting the space in order for them to be able to do that. In the United States, we've had a really dynamic, busy, and exhausting year for the team involved in the programming there. For many of you on this call who have joined us are from the US and have heard more about our programming and the work that the team has done there. They've been through an immense process of growth and development as they have been working to figure out what is the best way that NP utilizing unarmed civilian protection contribute towards reducing violence and increasing the safety and security for people impacted by violence and systems of oppressions in the US. So over the course of this year, they have been expanding out of where we started, which was in the Twin Cities, and we now have a program team operating in New York and implementing a project that is funded and in partnership and in support of the Asian American Federation. So this is exactly what the vision was when we started this program, is that we would find a way to engage with various community groups in different parts of the country who are being impacted by very specific types of violence. So the work in New York is really focused on helping to reduce violence and having members of the Asian American community who have felt under threat and have been receiving direct threats and incidents of violence to be able to feel safer, to protect themselves and to protect each other without escalating, without the use of weapons, and without the threat of force. The program is built around building up what they call peace ambassadors or safety ambassadors, who will therefore be embedded in the community and be able to then be representatives within their own community, protecting themselves, and something that we look to replicate in other cities going forward. The team has had, it's a very different landscape than other places that we work. One thing that has been really interesting to hear is how interested people in different parts of the world to hear about the team doing programming in the United States. As we think about how the humanitarian world is set up and what our considerations are, often what we see for those of us who come from the global north and work within what we would call the humanitarian system, and we move into places in the global south to provide help, support, deliver aid, and those types of things. One thing that helps to contribute towards breaking down the sort of colonial mindset that is around that is recognizing that there's not one country in the world where we could not be doing a better job at adjusting our approaches at the way we handle conflict and the way that we address violence as it emerges. And the work that by doing the work in the United States, by actually implementing programming and recognizing the problems and struggles that are there, the way that is being received by colleagues in South Sudan and Iraq and the Philippines and other countries that we're working in is really positive, and it is actually contributing to something that makes us feel more like a global community than we have previously. That's our global footprint, and those are the country programs that have been up and running. And as we grow, as I said, we've been interested in looking at consolidating, innovating, and accelerating. And part of that process is looking at growth. Over the last year, it's been quite exciting as we have now established ourselves in 2 new locations. We are both have an NP presence in Thailand and an NP presence in Sudan. The presence in Thailand is really an outgrowth of what has happened in Myanmar. So there's 2 reasons for us to be in Thailand. One is that there's been a big movement of people towards the border, and some have gone across the border into Thailand after the coup in Myanmar in February of this year. One thing that became clear to us is that it would be really helpful to be able to support our team in Myanmar by having a logistical, administrative, operational base close, but not within the country in case there was need for emergency evacuations, other places to source supplies that they need, and to be able to engage with the diplomat and donor community. In addition, because there has been a population move of people coming out of Myanmar into Thailand, seeking safer places, seeking education opportunities, so on and so forth, we felt it would be helpful to be able to be on the other side of the border and to be able to work and support those communities. So over the last 6 or 9 months, we've had a small team on the ground conducting an assessment, building relationships, building up partnerships with local universities and local organizations, and to see in what way we can be best useful and in support of that community. They have been based out of Chiang Mai. and working their way towards Meso, which is right against the border of Myanmar. We do recognize that there are people moving out of Myanmar in other directions as well, but right now we're concentrated on the work in Thailand. We have applied for registration in the country to set up a full country program, and which is also allowing us to do is to build on work we've done previously in the South, where there's been a low intensity conflict over the last number of years. And we've been partnering with community groups and universities in the South to do training in unarmed civilian protection and help those community groups really build up their local self-protection strategies. In addition to that, we have started our programming in Sudan. So as you know, we've now been in South Sudan for over 10 years. And now we have had the opportunity to move in Sudan. The Sudan program really grew out of a growth strategy and an opportunity that we had to provide training for a group of people in Darfur when the United Nations peacekeeping mission that was in Darfur was getting ready to draw down their forces. So there formerly was a peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, or in Darfur, and that over the course of this last year has changed its character, and it is now a political mission. There was concerns raised at that time that with the drawback of the peacekeeping forces, that there would be an opening for and a need for a different approach to violence reduction, conflict management, and conflict prevention. At that time, we were asked to provide training for civilian staff members from that UN mission, as well as community members in Darfur in unarmed civilian protection, to start planting the seeds and building the skill set around self-protection without the use of weapons, without the use of force, in preparation for that change. Over time, what we've been able to do then is to send in, we've just recently had a team on the ground who were implementing a pilot project in Darfur, and they were going through the various communities where there had been participants participating in the online course and working with them as they had started doing implementation and community self-protection work. Unfortunately, as we talked about earlier, with the change in context, one of the things that's happened recently, of course, there was the recent coup in Sudan. So that has put a temporary delay in the work that we were doing there. However, very recently we had, in fact, today had some great news that our application for registration has been approved and the country program will be able to go ahead. We've recently brought on Tanya, who was our former director, head of mission from Iraq, and she will be leading the startup in Sudan coming up in January. And that will be going forward with the support we expect with the funding support from the European Union. Our startup there will focus on 3 states within Darfur, and then we look to expand across different parts of Sudan where unarmed civilian protection work will be most useful. We've had the opportunity this last year as well to do more training in a similar approach that we did in Darfur, led through an online platform, which has been a new development for participants from the Central Sahel. So there's been a couple of things about this that are worth noting. Firstly and foremost, this was the first time that we have offered a training and any engagement entirely in French. So we had French trainers, a French coordinator, French mentors for the participants, and all the training material was translated into French before we began and contextualized for the local participants. We had a cohort of about 50 participants come together from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, who participated in 2 cohorts of 8-week training. As a result of their work in that training, some of the participants and some of the graduates of that course have now gone on to take what they have learned back into, some of them their schools and some of them with their local organizations that they're working with, and have started doing a localized version of unarmed civilian protection. We here in Geneva, the Geneva team, have been working to bring those graduates and those participants together with the diplomat and donor community so that they could bring forward their requests for further support. So in doing so, we've been able to bring them in contact with missions from France and from Canada, for example, who are very particularly interested in investing in supporting local work in the Central Sahel. And what we hope will happen is that NP will be able to go in the coming year in 2022 to be able to work with the local groups, perhaps do an assessment. And if it's needed, if it's welcomed, and if it's encouraged, we could see the possibility of having an NP country program in 1, 2, or 3 of those countries, in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. As we go forward, one of the things that's been really important to us, and something that we've really recognized, is that we've really grown and evolved the practice of unarmed civilian protection from the time that we started. We originally, many people will remember, is UCP used to mean peacekeeping. Now it means protection. And what that has really been representing is that as the world around us and the type of conflict that we've been involved in has changed and evolved, so is the way that we've been able to implement. And as we have learned, we are adapting the way we're moving. And with that in mind, we keep thinking about how do we make sure that UCP is a tool that is useful not just for today, not for instability and violence for today, but also for in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. And in doing so, what are the things that we need to be paying attention to that are real threats to human security? And we settled on 3 areas that we are calling innovation areas. It's not innovation broadly in the world. These are not new areas of concern globally, but what we mean is innovating for how do we use the toolkit and methodology of UCP to be useful in the areas of climate change, what we would broadly call tech, and power and privilege. So when we think about climate change, we can see that there is a correlation between instability, potential increased violence, population movement because of climate incidents, as together with fragility, with violent conflict, with climate change incidents. We have, as I mentioned, the floods in South Sudan, been working alongside climate change and almost inadvertently noticing that we would need to do an emergency response in an area that had been flooded because the population had to move quickly. We have set ourselves a goal to be more intentional in the way that we are working and looking for partners and creative engagement so that we have a better understanding what the situation is now and what it's expected to be in the coming 10, 20 years as it relates to patterns of climate change, drought, population movements, flooding, so on and so forth, food shortages, and areas of fragility. And how do we adapt unarmed civilian protection? And how do we start working in those spaces now in order to be contributory towards prevention and stability? Tech is an area that is so large and different for us to consider, but it is something that we really recognize as a contemporary threat. We see the impact of what is commodified big data, the emergence and strengthening of artificial intelligence, and even the continued use, as we're already impacted by, of things like unmanned weapons, like we would know as drones. Those things all together form a big barrel of what we would call under the umbrella of tech. In this contemporary world where a rumor travels at the speed of light, we recognize that unarmed civilian protection, we really need to think about how we can adapt and work in those tech spaces so that we can we take the principles of relationship-based, nonpartisan approaches to dealing with our differences into a space that is virtual, or into a combined space where new technology is meeting existing conflict. We don't yet have the answer for this, but we've set an intention to work in this space and to be able to learn and to grow so that we are continuing to evolve as we go forward. And finally, with the space of power and privilege. And this brings me back to where NP started. NP really started with the idea that being a non-violent peace force, exactly what the intention was behind the name of as the organization was named, was to contribute towards a paradigm shift, towards a change in the way that we approach the way that we cohabitate together on the planet. And that really means about contributing towards breaking down systems of oppression that allow for the normalization of violence. And we are in a place now with Nonviolent Peaceforce is being a stronger organization, being 20 years old now, to be able to really go back and contribute towards thinking about how we can see UCP as not only a tool for day-to-day violence reduction, or what we would call a humanitarian intervention tool, but as a broader contribution towards breaking down those systems of oppression and being intentional in the way that we develop our programs, the way that we work with other partners, the way that we really center those most impacted by violence, those most impacted by oppression in the development and delivery of this type of programming in order to be able to shift and move forward. We want to continue to accelerate through our work that we do in policy and advocacy. We now have had Mel and another colleague, Gay, based in New York, working at the UN for quite a number of years. And in this last year, our policy and advocacy team has grown quite substantively. We now have a full-time policy and advocacy person representing Nonviolent Peaceforce and our concerns around unarmed civilian protection in Washington, D.C., and a full-time person doing that same job, who's just a part-time person doing that job, pardon me, with us based in Brussels, working with the EU, advocating for unarmed civilian-led strategies to be given a greater importance in terms of funding and support as it relates to these various fragile contexts around the world. We see research as another opportunity to be able to contribute to accelerating this community of practice. Doing research on unarmed civilian protection, why does it work? How does the application of nonpartisan unarmed civilian-led strategies contribute to reducing violence and changing the way that we collectively approach our concerns around security and stability? Further training, reaching out to broader groups. We have been experimenting with online training and taking the work that we have done, what we have learned through our 20 years of practice, and moving forward in reaching out into broader groups. And looking at the good practice. What do we and the 60 or so other organizations around the world who do work that is similar to ours that we know of, what do we have in common? How does this approach to violence reduction differ from other approaches? And what can we learn from each other? And how can we learn to be a force multiplier? Nonviolent Peaceforce, we've made as we looked at the world around us, we're making a really conscious decision to think about what does it mean to grow and where do we want to go. We have made a decision that any growth that we do is really focused around growing for impact, not just growing for the sake of being larger, to being a bigger organization with a bigger budget and having more people, but for the very sake of impact and being able to have to be a force multiplier for a broader application of unarmed civilian protection around the world. So we frame that in the language of a community of practice. We are willing to commit our convening power, what we have learned, and the direction and strategic thinking we have going forward, to working with other partners who are interested in learning and learning from them. And together as a community of practice across the world, we see that as the best way to be the force multiplier and contributing towards the larger paradigm shift that we hope to be able to see coming forward as we move toward a safer and more just world. So that's a lot of talking at a lot of people. So please, let's take a few minutes. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen so I can see you. And then why don't we have the opportunity to have some questions and answers or some discussion. So if anybody has questions or comments they would like to make, please go ahead and put it in the chat. I've got some friends here in the group who are going to help me see who's out there and what's coming up, and we can go from there and take a few minutes to do that. Go ahead. Got a quiet group today. Do we have any questions out there? Is anybody interested in knowing anything more about any of the countries we work in? We've got people on the call from different countries we're working on. I could call upon them. So we have a question here. How do your activities reduce the twin existential threats facing humankind? Climate change and nuclear weapons. This is a big question. And thank you for that. I think we see twin existential threats, and we think about existential threats writ large, and going back to what I was speaking about at the beginning of really feeling this is a moment where there are winds of change. And I think that those two things, what they have in common is that they are emblematic or illustrative of decades of poor decision making and a representation of doing business as usual. What we are trying to focus on and do with our work is really contribute towards not just changing one day at a time, but really changing about the way that we think. We call it internally a paradigm shift, and thinking that by demonstrating that in some of the most actively violent places in the world, by using civilian-led strategies without the use of weapons, without the use of force, demonstrating a longer, more patience approach to cohabitation, that it is a way to change the way that we are thinking and the way that we engage. These are not simple problems. There is no simple solution, and what we are looking at doing is being contributory towards that. But it's really the existential threats also need to come with a paradigm shifting change in the way that we live together. Let me just see here. How is NP keeping the connection between all these international sites as a unified organization addressing the specific needs of community? This is a great question. We talk about this a lot. One of the pieces of NP's organizational culture is decentralization. And that being is that we try and keep decision-making and certainly planning as close to the problem or the concern as it needs to be. So the program teams in each of the respective countries are working with the communities that they're in service of and in partnership with to develop the programming that is really based on the needs right there. So the day-to-day experience of the team working in Mindanao versus a team working in South Sudan versus a team working in the US might look quite different. While they're drawing from the same toolkit and using the same methodology, it's really being adapted to what is needed by that local community. And that can impact not only the actual programming, but the structures of the team, the working hours of the day, the language that they're communicating, so on and so forth. Our job as the International Secretariat based in Geneva is to be the connector between all of the units to provide the support that all the units need to make sure that they have the resources that they need, the training supplies that they need, so on and so forth, and that they have the space to work in to be safe to continue to innovate and adapt to the local communities. Let me have another just quick check here. Oh, coming in fast here. How can we as individuals make the most impact within our own communities? And what am I most hopeful of? Well, exactly those two things come together. There can be this feeling and this illusion that to contribute and do well, you have to do it with other people in another place. And even within our own walls, what I would say, sort of our metaphorical walls of NP are starting places that the work starts within, and the work starts with each of us as individuals. And that is part of right from the day that we join within the organization, the type of training that we do with our staff and with each other, and the way that we engage with each other in terms of the way that we manage our teams, the way we try and deal with conflict if we have difficulties with one another, is that we are embodying these values and that we are living the principles that we espouse. And when people ask what can they do in their community it is literally that, is to work. If you look anywhere within any community that you're in, there is a way to be able to be engaging, whether it's in with domestic violence, violence in schools, if there are people who are insufficiently housed and feeling vulnerable and feeling threatened, people who are being targeted because of something within their identity. There is a space where you could engage and be part of a process that does bring a nonviolent approach to changing that dynamic. This is exactly what I'm most hopeful for. When we see the work of the teams that are out in, when I see an example, I talked about this example of this peace conference that happened in Juba, where what started 10 years ago, 11 years ago, with a very small handful of women in South Sudan, brave enough to come forward and say, I want to not be a victim, I want to be a leader in peace and security, who are now sitting down in the nation's capital with representatives from all the women from all the different states, and bringing their own voices forward and saying directly to ministers, to government authorities, to leaders of the armed forces and the opposition, the way you are conducting business is impacting us, it is hurting us, and we demand something different, is an extraordinary change in the space that we've seen. And it gives me hope every day when I see something like that happen. Quick question, do we have a plan on working in DR Congo? It's an interesting question. It has come up recently because we know the peacekeeping forces will be drawing down very soon in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we've been having some conversations. We've had some people approach us from the UN mission within the DRC and ask if we would be interested in having a conversation about looking at an NP or a UCP presence, an unarmed civilian protection presence, going into the DRC in a similar way that we've moved into Sudan in that same space. So no promises, we're having just an exploration, but we'll see what happens there. Okay, let's have one more question, and then we will call on our dear colleague to share some thoughts with us. With the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased use of the internet, we are witnessing a new form of violence, usually from those with double nationalities and those seeking for asylum, where they are increasing promoting violence. I think this question is a bit oriented to what we're seeing in the online space. People have been forced apart, as we all know. We've been forced into isolation, and a lot of our connection has been happening online with each other. And in many cases, we've seen a real uprising in factionalization, in polarization, in hate speech, in online threats, and creating harm for people and trying to shift public opinion. So this is really difficult to deal with. This is an area that is new for us to engage in, and I'm not quite sure if I well understand the question, but what I do see is that it's an affirming representation of the need to see that the world that we live in now, we live in a virtual space as equally, if not more so in some cases, as we do in the physical space. So how do we transfer the principles of unarmed civilian protection, the principles of nonviolence, into that space? A space where a rumor can travel at the speed of light, where a word of hate can travel at the speed of light. Can we replicate that and also change and capture and ignite imaginations around the possibilities of living in a different way? All right, let's bring that to a close. I'm sorry I couldn't keep up with all of those questions. And on this call we have with us today is another dear friend and colleague in the NP family, Fatuma Ibrahim. Fatuma is on NP's board of directors and has been in connection with and friends of NP for a long time before that. Fatuma and I first met in South Sudan when she was the chief of child protection for UNICEF, and I was our then country director for NP's work in South Sudan. And it was in fact Fatuma who helped us get that first project running around the women's protection teams, as it was supported by UNICEF under her direction and guidance. So I welcome you, Fatuma, and invite you to share your thoughts and reflections with us. think she might need help getting unmuted. Our tech geniuses in the background.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. As I sat here listening to you, I couldn't feel more proud to be associated with the work of Nonviolence Peaceforce. This is incredible. The last 20 years have been really incredible. And this is because mainly of the commitment of the staff of NP, who are willing to work in all these difficult situations, to use UCP approaches to reduce violence, to protect civilians, to support local communities to be able to support themselves. Incredible. I feel so privileged to be part of this community. And really, on one hand, we have the commitment of the staff and your whole team, but we also have the commitment of the donors. Without the contribution from donors, this work would be nowhere. And we are incredibly grateful for that. Now, as a member of the board, I wish to really give special thanks to donors everywhere, big donors, individual donors who are supporting NP work, who continue to support NP work. Thank you so much. However, I want to take this opportunity. This is December. It's the month for giving. It's the month for caring. And to send out special appeal to the people on the call. I know that a lot of you have already made donations, contributions to NP work, but maybe hearing about the work that we are continuing to do in the next 5 years, you may want to contribute more or to make more donations. Please do visit our website. And for those of you who are not going to do it now, we hope that in future, you'll be able to join and provide support to NP to continue with this incredible work. So many more people in this world need this kind of support. And then it can only work if we do get, especially the financial support that we need. Thank you so much, everyone. Back to you, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Fatuma. Now, if you have a look in the chat, we're just going to wrap up here, but if you have a look in the chat box, there's a link. We'd love to hear your feedback. So there's a link if you would like to participate for a little minute in a survey. We'd really appreciate if we don't get to your questions, as we say, in the last few minutes, as we are wrapping up here, we can, if you can participate in the survey, we can try and get back to you directly and answer your questions. And just up from that, there is a link to the online donation form as well. And as it is the end of the year, let's just take a minute to, as we part company and wrap up together, to wish each other well, to send out our love and support to everybody around the world engaged in whatever kind of work that they can, whatever kind of contribution that they can be making towards moving us away from a dependence on weapons and violence and threats to be able to conduct our business and into a space where we are sharing, where we are living in the harmony, and we have a safer place to live for everyone. So thank you all for this ongoing support, for your attention, for your time today, and wishing you the best as we wrap up this year. And we look forward to seeing you again next year.